No one dared to help her until a small Navajo girl with braided hair stepped forward and whispered words that would change everything. Canyon de Chelly, Arizona Territory, autumn of 1892. The red sandstone cliffs rose like ancient sentinels against a bruised sky, their surfaces carved by wind and time into shapes that seemed to watch, to judge, to remember. The air hung heavy with the scent of juniper and dust, and somewhere in the distance a raven called out, its voice echoing through the canyons like a warning. The trading post sat at the edge of the Navajo reservation, a weathered structure of wood and stone that served as the only bridge between two worlds that rarely touched without friction. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Catherine Harlow stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles white beneath skin that had been scrubbed raw that morning in a desperate attempt to appear presentable. She was 24 years old, though the past 3 months had aged her in ways no mirror could fully capture. Her dark blonde hair, once carefully pinned and styled, now hung in a simple braid down her back, wisps escaping around a face that had lost its softness. Her green eyes, red-rimmed from sleepless nights and silent tears, darted from face to face, searching for something she could not name. Mercy, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement that she existed at all. Her dress, a faded grey cotton that had once been blue, hung loose on her frame. She had lost weight, the kind of weight that comes from fear eating away at appetite, from running until there is nothing left to burn but hope itself. The hem was torn in 3 places, muddy from travel, and there was a stain near the collar that no amount of scrubbing could remove. It was blood, though she told herself it was rust from the wagon wheel she had hidden behind 2 nights ago. The trading post was crowded that afternoon. Ranchers had come in for supplies, their faces weathered and hard, their eyes suspicious of anything that disrupted the careful balance they had built in this harsh land. Townspeople from the nearby settlement had arrived to sell goods, to trade, to gossip. And standing near the back, quiet and watchful, were members of the Navajo community, men and women who had learned long ago that silence was often the safest response to the chaos brought by outsiders. Catherine had arrived an hour before, stumbling through the door with desperation carved into every line of her body. She had no money, no food, and nowhere to go. She had asked, voice shaking, if anyone could spare work, a meal, a corner to sleep in. The response had been immediate and brutal. The trading post owner, a thick-necked man named Buchanan, with a beard like steel wool and eyes like chips of flint, had looked her up and down with open disgust. "We don't take in drifters," he had said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Especially not women with no husband, no family, and no decent explanation for why they're alone." She had tried to explain, words tumbling over each other in a rush of panic. She had been traveling with a wagon train, she said. They were heading to California, seeking new opportunities, a fresh start. But somewhere near the Painted Desert, raiders had attacked. Not Apache, not Navajo, just men. White men with faces covered and guns that spoke louder than any law. They had taken everything, killed the wagon master and 3 other men, scattered the rest. Catherine had run, hidden among the rocks, watched from a distance as smoke rose from burning supplies. When she finally crept back, everyone was gone. Dead or fled, she did not know. Raiders, Buchanan had repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. "Convenient story. How do we know you're not running from the law? How do we know you didn't bring trouble with you?" "I didn't," Catherine had whispered, but her voice was too small, too fragile to carry weight in a room full of men who had survived by trusting no one. A woman near the counter, Mrs. Pritchard, a rancher's wife with a face like dried leather and a mouth set in a permanent line of disapproval, had sniffed loudly. A respectable woman wouldn't be out here alone. If your story were true, you'd have family looking for you. You'd have someone, but Catherine had no one. Her parents were dead, taken by fever when she was 17. Her brother had moved east years ago, and she had not heard from him since. The wagon train had been her last hope, a group of strangers bound together by shared desperation and dreams of something better. And now even that was gone. She had stood there, surrounded by hostile faces, feeling the walls close in. No one moved to help. No one offered a hand or a kind word. They simply stared, waiting for her to leave, to disappear, to become someone else's problem. The Navajo families near the back watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. They knew what it was to be unwanted, to be viewed with suspicion, but they also knew better than to interfere in the affairs of white settlers. The cost of such interference was always high. Catherine's vision had begun to blur. She had not eaten in 2 days, had barely slept in 5. Her legs trembled beneath her, and she swayed slightly, catching herself against the edge of a wooden barrel. The room tilted, sounds becoming distant and muffled, and she thought perhaps this was how it would end. Not with violence or drama, but with simply fading away, becoming another ghost in a land already crowded with them. Then a small voice cut through the fog. "My father will keep you safe." The room fell silent. Every head turned. Standing just inside the doorway, half hidden behind a tall man in worn denim and a dark hat, was a little girl. She could not have been more than 7 years old, with long black hair woven into 2 thick braids that hung past her shoulders. Her skin was the warm brown of red clay, and her dark eyes were wide and solemn, fixed on Catherine with an intensity that seemed far too old for such a young face. She wore a simple dress of deep blue calico, and around her neck hung a small silver pendant shaped like a turtle. The man beside her, clearly her father, stiffened. He was tall, perhaps in his early 30s, with broad shoulders and a presence that seemed to fill the space around him without effort. His face was angular, handsome in a way that was both striking and severe, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. His hair, black as raven feathers, was tied back, and he wore the clothing of someone who moved between worlds: denim trousers, a cotton shirt, a leather vest, and moccasins that made no sound on the wooden floor. His eyes, dark and unreadable, flicked from his daughter to Catherine and back again. "Nijoni," he said quietly, his voice low and controlled. "We do not interfere." But the little girl stepped forward, her small hand reaching out toward Catherine, though she did not touch her. "She needs help, Father. She is like the bird with the broken wing we found last spring. If we do not help, she will die." Buchanan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Well, if it isn't Thomas Blackwater come to play hero. Since when do you care about white women in trouble?" Thomas Blackwater did not respond immediately. His gaze remained on his daughter, and something flickered in his expression, something that might have been pain or memory, or simply the weight of a decision he did not want to make. Catherine saw it, that brief crack in the armor, and for the first time since entering the trading post, she felt something other than despair. She felt seen. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible. "I have nowhere else to go." Thomas looked at her then, really looked at her, and Catherine felt the intensity of that gaze like a physical thing. He was measuring her, she realized, weighing her words against some internal scale she could not see. His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would turn away, would take his daughter's hand, and leave her to whatever fate awaited. But then Nijoni spoke again. "Father, grandmother said that strength is shown not in what we take, but in what we give when we have little to spare. You told me to remember her words." A muscle in Thomas's jaw twitched. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, something had shifted. He looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over Buchanan, over Mrs. Pritchard, over the other settlers who watched with varying degrees of curiosity and hostility. "She comes with me," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that brooked no argument. "If anyone has a problem with that, they can speak now." The room remained silent, but the silence was different now. It was not the silence of agreement, but of people choosing not to challenge a man they had learned was dangerous when provoked. Thomas Blackwater was known in these parts, respected by some, feared by others. He was a tracker, a guide, a man who could navigate the canyons with his eyes closed and read stories in the sand that others could not see. He was also Navajo, and that alone made him an outsider in the eyes of many settlers, but it also made him someone they occasionally needed. Buchanan spat into a brass spittoon near the counter. "Your funeral, Blackwater. Don't come crying to us when she brings trouble to your door." Thomas did not respond. He simply turned to Catherine and nodded once toward the door. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though in truth she was not certain. Her legs felt like water, her head swam with dizziness, but she would crawl if necessary. Anything to escape the suffocating judgment of this room. Nijoni stepped forward and took Catherine's hand, her small fingers wrapping around Catherine's with surprising strength. "Come," she said softly. "Our home is not far. You will be safe there." Catherine looked down at the little girl, at the earnest expression on her face, and felt something break inside her chest. She had not been touched with kindness in so long that this simple gesture, a child's hand in hers, nearly undid her completely. Tears welled in her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely, not wanting to appear even weaker than she already did. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice cracking. Thomas walked ahead, his stride long and purposeful, and Catherine followed, Nijoni still holding her hand. As they stepped out into the fading afternoon light, Catherine felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her back, heard the murmur of voices rising as soon as the door closed behind them. She knew what they were saying. She knew the assumptions being made, the judgments being passed. But for the first time in months, she did not care. The landscape outside the trading post was vast and unforgiving, all red rock and sparse vegetation, with the San Juan Mountains rising in the distance like the spine of some ancient, sleeping creature. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the cliffs in shades of orange and gold, and the air had begun to cool, carrying with it the promise of a cold night ahead. Thomas's horse, a sturdy paint mare, stood tethered nearby, and he untied her with practiced efficiency. "You will ride," he said to Catherine, his tone making it clear this was not a suggestion. "Nijoni will ride with me." Catherine hesitated. She had ridden horses before, but not often, and not in her current state. Still, she nodded and allowed Thomas to help her into the saddle. His hands were impersonal but steady, and he did not linger. Nijoni climbed up behind her father with the ease of someone who had done so 1,000 times, wrapping her small arms around his waist. They rode in silence, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth and the whisper of wind through the canyon. Catherine swayed in the saddle, exhaustion pulling at her like a tide, but she forced herself to stay upright, to hold on. She would not fall. She would not burden these strangers more than she already had. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, they reached a small homestead nestled at the base of a red rock formation. It was modest, a single-story structure built from adobe and wood, with a corral to one side and a small garden plot that showed signs of recent harvest. Smoke rose from a chimney, and the scent of cooking meat drifted on the air, making Catherine's stomach clench with hunger so sharp it was almost painful. Thomas dismounted and lifted Nijoni down, then turned to help Catherine. She slid from the saddle gracelessly, her legs nearly buckling when her feet hit the ground. Thomas caught her elbow, steadying her without comment, and guided her toward the house. Inside, the warmth was immediate and enveloping. A fire burned in the hearth, casting flickering light across walls hung with woven blankets in patterns Catherine did not recognize but found beautiful. The main room was simple but comfortable, with a table, chairs, and a few shelves holding dishes and supplies. A doorway led to what Catherine assumed were sleeping quarters, and another opened onto a small kitchen area where something bubbled in a pot over the fire. "Sit," Thomas said, pointing to a chair near the hearth. Catherine obeyed, sinking into the seat with a relief so profound it was almost painful. Nijoni disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with a cup of water, which she offered to Catherine with both hands. As if presenting something precious, Catherine took it, her hands shaking so badly that water sloshed over the rim. She drank deeply, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat, and when the cup was empty, Nijoni refilled it without being asked. Thomas stood by the door, arms crossed, watching. His expression remained unreadable, but Catherine had the sense that he was waiting for something. Perhaps for her to speak, to explain herself further, to justify why she deserved the shelter he had offered. But before she could find words, Nijoni spoke again, her voice bright with the innocent certainty of childhood. "Father, she can stay in the room where grandmother used to sleep. It has been empty too long. Grandmother would want someone to use it." Thomas's jaw tightened, and for a moment pain flickered across his face, raw and unguarded. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask of control he seemed to wear so easily. "That room is not for guests," he said quietly, "but grandmother said a home that does not welcome others becomes a tomb." Nijoni persisted, her dark eyes wide and pleading. "She said that to me before she went to join the ancestors. She said you would forget and I should remind you." Thomas closed his eyes, and Catherine saw the battle being waged behind that calm exterior. She did not understand the full context, did not know what loss haunted this man, but she recognized grief when she saw it. It was a mirror of her own. Finally, Thomas opened his eyes and nodded once, a sharp, almost angry motion. "Fine, she stays in that room, but only for a few days, until she is strong enough to move on." Catherine wanted to protest, to say she would leave sooner, that she did not want to impose. But the truth was, she had nowhere to go. No plan, no resources, no strength left to face the world alone. So instead she simply whispered, "Thank you." Thomas did not acknowledge her gratitude. He simply turned to Nijoni and said, "Show her the room. Then we eat." Nijoni took Catherine's hand again, that same gentle, trusting gesture, and led her through the doorway into a small hallway. The room at the end was dimly lit by the fading daylight that filtered through a single window. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a woven blanket, a wooden chest at the foot, and a small table beside the bed holding a clay oil lamp. The walls were bare except for a single piece of woven cloth hanging above the bed, depicting a pattern of interlocking diamonds in shades of red, black and white. "This was grandmother's room," Nijoni said softly, her voice taking on a reverent quality. "She was very wise. She taught me many things before she left us. Father does not like to come in here anymore, but I think she would be happy to know someone is using it again." Catherine looked around the room, feeling like an intruder in a sacred space. "When did she pass?" she asked gently. 2 winters ago," Nijoni said. "She was very old and very tired, but she was not afraid. She said death is just another journey, and she had been on many journeys in her life." Catherine knelt down so she was at eye level with the little girl. "She sounds like a remarkable woman. Thank you for sharing her room with me. I will take good care of it." Nijoni smiled, a bright, genuine expression that transformed her solemn face into something radiant. "I knew you were kind," she said. "I could see it in your eyes. Father sees it too, even if he does not say so." Before Catherine could respond, Thomas's voice called from the main room, "Nijoni, come. Let her rest." The little girl squeezed Catherine's hand once more, then skipped out of the room, leaving Catherine alone. She sat on the edge of the bed, her body sagging with exhaustion, and for the first time in months she allowed herself to simply breathe. She was safe, at least for tonight. She was warm, and soon she would eat, and there was a bed beneath her that did not feel like stone or cold ground. Tears came then, silent and unstoppable, streaming down her face as all the fear and pain and desperation of the past months finally broke through the dam she had built to contain them. She wept for everything she had lost, for the terror of being hunted, for the humiliation of being turned away again and again, for the kindness of a child who had seen her when no one else would. And somewhere in the main room, Thomas Blackwater stood with his back to the fire, staring at the closed door of his mother's room, and wondered what he had just brought into his home. Dawn came slowly to the canyon, light creeping across the red rock faces like honey poured from a careful hand. Catherine woke to the sound of voices, soft and melodic, speaking in a language she did not understand. For a moment, disoriented and still half caught in dreams of running through darkness, she tensed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then memory returned, the trading post, the little girl's hand in hers, the quiet man who had offered shelter when no one else would. She sat up slowly, every muscle in her body protesting. The bruises from her flight through the desert had deepened overnight, purple and yellow blooms across her ribs and shoulders. Her feet, blistered and raw, throbbed with each small movement. But she was alive, and she was warm, and through the small window she could see the sky turning from deep purple to pale gold. The voices continued, and Catherine realized they were coming from outside. She rose carefully, wrapping the woven blanket around her shoulders, and moved to the window. In the yard below, Thomas and Nijoni stood together near the corral. The little girl was practicing something, her small body moving through a series of deliberate gestures while Thomas watched, occasionally correcting her stance or the angle of her arm. It looked almost like a dance, but there was a precision to it that suggested purpose beyond beauty. Catherine watched, transfixed. In the growing light, Thomas looked different than he had the night before. Less guarded, perhaps, or simply more himself. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of deep familiarity with his own body. And when he demonstrated a movement for Nijoni, there was a grace to it that seemed at odds with his size and obvious strength. Nijoni laughed at something he said, the sound bright and clear, and Thomas's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, though it was gone too quickly for Catherine to be certain. She turned away from the window, feeling like an intruder on a private moment. Her clothes from the day before lay folded on the wooden chest, and she dressed quickly, wincing as the rough fabric scraped against her injuries. She braided her hair with fingers that still trembled slightly, tucked the loose strands behind her ears, and took a deep breath before opening the door. The main room was empty, but the fire in the hearth had been built up, and on the table sat a clay bowl containing what looked like cornmeal mush, still steaming, and a cup of water. Beside it lay a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Catherine approached slowly, uncertain if the food was meant for her or if she was intruding on someone else's breakfast. But there was no one else in the house, and the bowl sat at the place where she had sat the night before. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, despite the blandness of the meal. It was the first real food she had eaten in days, and her stomach, shrunken from deprivation, could only handle small amounts. When she finished, she unwrapped the cloth bundle and found a dress, simple and well-worn but clean, in a deep rust color that reminded her of the canyon walls. It was clearly made for someone else, someone shorter and more fully built than Catherine in her current state. But it was whole and respectable. The door opened, and Nijoni entered, her face bright with morning energy. When she saw Catherine, she smiled wide. "You are awake. Good. Father said you would sleep until midday, but I knew you would wake with the sun. Strong people always do." Catherine found herself smiling back, though it felt strange on her face, as if her muscles had forgotten how. "Thank you for the food. And for this," she gestured to the dress. "That was my grandmother's," Nijoni said, moving closer to examine how it fit. She was a small woman, but strong, like a juniper tree that grows in the rocks. "Father said we should offer it to you because your dress is torn and you will need something better for working." "Working," Catherine repeated, uncertain. Nijoni nodded enthusiastically. "Father says if you stay here, even for a little while, you must work." "We all work. He works with the horses and guides people through the canyons. I work in the garden and help with cooking and learn the old ways from the women in the village." "You will work too, yes?" Catherine felt a rush of relief so strong it nearly brought tears to her eyes again. She had been terrified that she would be treated as a burden, as something to be tolerated but not included. The idea that she could contribute, that she could earn her keep rather than simply existing as an object of charity, was like water after a long drought. "Yes," she said firmly. "I will work. Whatever you need I can learn." Nijoni clapped her hands together, delighted. "Come then. Father is with the horses. We will show you." They went outside into the morning cool, and Catherine pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The air smelled of sage and wood smoke, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the cry of a hawk. Thomas stood in the corral with 3 horses, one the paint mare from the night before, and 2 others, a grey gelding with a scarred flank, and a young bay that danced nervously at the end of a lead rope. He looked up as they approached, his dark eyes assessing Catherine with the same measuring gaze he had used in the trading post. She straightened under that scrutiny, refusing to appear weak despite the exhaustion that still dragged at her bones. "You ate," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, thank you," he nodded once, then turned his attention back to the bay. "This one was brought in yesterday by a rancher from the north. Spooked by something, maybe a rattlesnake, maybe just shadows. Now she will not let anyone near her right side. Cannot be ridden like this. Cannot be sold." Catherine watched as the horse pulled against the rope, eyes rolling white, ears flat against her skull. She recognized that terror, had felt it herself not so long ago. "She is afraid," Catherine said softly. Thomas glanced at her, something flickering in his expression. "Fear makes creatures dangerous, to themselves and others, or it makes them careful," Catherine countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "Sometimes fear is the only thing that keeps you alive long enough to find safety." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the huffing breath of the frightened horse. Then Thomas handed the lead rope to Nijoni, who took it with practiced confidence, despite her small size, and gestured for Catherine to follow him to the fence. "You know horses?" he asked. "A little. My father had a small farm in Ohio before he died. We kept 2 horses for the plow and 1 for riding. I helped care for them." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, as if he were choosing each word with deliberation. "If you stay, you will help with the animals. Feeding, grooming, mucking the stalls. Nijoni does much of this work, but she is young and small. It is too much for her alone." "I will help," Catherine said immediately. "I'm stronger than I look right now. Once I've eaten properly for a few days, I can do more." He studied her again, and this time his gaze lingered on the bruises visible above the collar of the borrowed dress, on the way she held herself as if expecting a blow. "You were hurt," he said flatly. "When the raiders came—" Catherine's throat tightened. She had not spoken of it in detail to anyone, had barely allowed herself to think about it. But there was something in Thomas's directness, in the lack of pity or prurient curiosity in his tone, that made her want to answer honestly. "Yes," she said quietly. "One of them caught me before I could run far enough. He wanted to take me with them, said a woman would be useful in camp. I fought. He hit me, knocked me down. But then there was gunfire, and he ran to see what was happening, and I got away. I hid in a dry creek bed until everything went quiet." Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You fought?" "I had nothing left to lose." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Good. Fighting is better than surrendering. Even when you lose, you take something from your enemy. Fear, time, blood. It is never wasted." The words should have sounded harsh, but instead, Catherine found them strangely comforting. There was no false consolation in them, no attempt to soften the reality of what she had experienced. Just acknowledgement that she had survived, and that survival had value. Over the following days, a rhythm began to establish itself. Catherine rose each morning before dawn, following the sounds of Thomas and Nijoni beginning their daily routines. She learned to build up the fire properly, to prepare the simple meals that sustained them: cornmeal mush, beans slow-cooked with wild onions, rabbit or venison when Thomas brought back meat from hunting. Nijoni taught her how to make fry bread, laughing when Catherine's first attempts came out either burnt or doughy, praising her when she finally achieved the right golden crispness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She worked in the corral, learning the temperaments of each horse. The paint mare, whose name was Sage, was steady and patient. tolerated Catherine's uncertain hands without complaint. The grey gelding, called Storm for the pattern of his coat, was more suspicious but could be won over with patience and dried apple slices. And the bay, whom Nijoni had named Dancer, slowly, gradually began to accept Catherine's presence on her right side, though she still shied at sudden movements. Thomas watched these interactions from a distance, rarely speaking unless to give instruction or correction. He was not unkind, but neither was he warm. He existed in a state of careful neutrality, as if he had built walls around himself and was determined not to let anyone breach them. Yet Catherine noticed things, the way he always made sure there was enough food on her plate, the way he positioned himself between her and the door when strangers came to the homestead, the way his gaze would linger on her when he thought she was not looking, assessing her progress, her strength, perhaps her trustworthiness. One afternoon, about a week after her arrival, a group of Navajo women came to visit. They brought baskets of dried herbs and vegetables, gifts for Nijoni, and curious glances for Catherine. They spoke in their own language, voices rising and falling in patterns that sounded like music, and Catherine felt herself shrinking under their examination. She knew she was an outsider here, knew that her presence was unusual and probably unwelcome. But Nijoni, sweet and fearless, took Catherine's hand and pulled her forward. "This is Kate," she announced in English for Catherine's benefit. "She is staying with us. She is learning to be useful." One of the women, older with silver threading through her black hair and eyes that missed nothing, stepped forward. She looked Catherine up and down, not unkindly but thoroughly, then spoke in heavily accented English. "You are the one from the trading post? The one no white people would help?" Catherine nodded, unsure what else to do. The woman's mouth curved slightly. Thomas Blackwater has a soft heart beneath all his stone. His mother, she was the same, always bringing home broken things, birds with hurt wings, rabbits caught in traps, people with nowhere to go. She said every creature deserves a chance to heal. Another woman, younger with a baby strapped to her back, added something in Navajo, and the older woman translated. "She says you work hard. She has seen you in the corral with the frightened horse. She says patience with animals often means patience with people too." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, uncertain if this was praise or mere observation. "I am grateful for the shelter," she said carefully. "I try to earn my place." The older woman nodded approvingly. "Good. Gratitude and work, these are the things that matter. Not your white skin or your strange yellow hair. If you work and you respect our ways, you will have no trouble here." They stayed for an hour, showing Nijoni new weaving patterns and leaving Catherine with a small bundle of medicinal herbs and instructions, delivered through Nijoni's enthusiastic translation, on how to make a poultice for bruises and sore muscles. When they left, Catherine felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite acceptance, but not rejection either. A door perhaps left slightly ajar. That evening, as the sun set and painted the canyon walls in shades of crimson and gold, Catherine sat outside on a flat rock near the house, grinding the herbs the women had left her. Nijoni had gone to bed early, exhausted from the day's excitement, and Thomas was somewhere in the corral, checking the horses one final time before dark. The air had cooled, and Catherine wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, breathing in the scent of sage and juniper. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, that distinctive quiet tread that somehow still managed to announce his presence. He came and stood beside her rock, not speaking, just looking out at the canyon as the last light faded from the sky. "The women liked you," he said finally. Catherine looked up, surprised. "Did they?" "Well, they brought you herbs. They do not waste gifts on people they do not respect." She considered this, then returned to her grinding. "I liked them too. They were kind in their way." Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "You are doing well with Dancer. She let you touch her face today." Catherine's hands stilled. Praise from Thomas Blackwater was rare enough that she did not quite know how to receive it. "She is learning to trust again," she said softly. "It just takes time." "Yes," Thomas agreed. "Time and patience. Not everyone has both." He turned to leave, but Catherine spoke before she could stop herself. "Why did you help me? At the trading post you could have walked away. Everyone else did, but you did not. Why?" Thomas stopped, his back to her, silhouetted against the darkening sky. For a moment she thought he would not answer, that she had overstepped and would be met with silence or rebuke. But then he turned, and in the dim light his expression was more open than she had ever seen it. "My mother used to say that we are all walking wounded in this life," he said quietly. "Some of us just hide it better than others. She said that when you see someone bleeding, you do not ask them why they were careless enough to get cut. You just stop the bleeding." Catherine's throat tightened with emotion. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Thomas said, and there was a weight in those two words that spoke of grief still raw, despite the passage of time. "She died in the winter, pneumonia, and I could do nothing to save her. All my knowledge of the land, of tracking, of survival, none of it mattered. She just slipped away." "I'm sorry," Catherine whispered. Thomas shook his head. "Do not be. She lived a full life, raised me and my sister, taught us everything she knew. But when she died, something in this house died too. It became too quiet. Nijoni was just a baby then, barely speaking. The silence was like a weight pressing down on everything." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was rough. "When Nijoni spoke up for you at the trading post, I heard my mother's words in her mouth. That same insistence that kindness is not optional, that we help because we must, not because it is easy. And I realized that if I turned away from you, I would be teaching my daughter that it is acceptable to ignore suffering when it is inconvenient. I could not do that." Catherine stood, the blanket falling from her shoulders, and took a step toward him. "You gave me my life back," she said, her voice shaking with intensity. "You and Nijoni. I will never forget that." Thomas looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she had not expected. Not just guardedness or grief, but a flicker of something warmer, something that might have been the beginning of connection. Then he blinked, and it was gone, replaced by his usual careful neutrality. "Come inside," he said gruffly. "The night will be cold, and you are still recovering." But as they walked back to the house together, Catherine felt something new growing inside her chest. Not just gratitude, though there was certainly that. Something deeper, more complex. A sense of belonging, fragile and tentative, but there nonetheless. For the first time since the wagon train was attacked, she allowed herself to imagine a future that extended beyond mere survival. A future where she might not just exist, but live. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and through the doorway to Nijoni's small room, Catherine could hear the little girl's soft, even breathing. Thomas moved to check the fire, adding another log, and Catherine went to the kitchen area to prepare tea from the herbs the women had left. They moved around each other in comfortable silence, and when Catherine handed Thomas a cup, their fingers brushed briefly, a moment of contact that sent an unexpected warmth through her. Thomas took the cup and sat in the chair near the fire, and Catherine took the seat across from him. They drank in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had begun, however tentatively, to trust each other. "Tomorrow," Thomas said eventually, "there is a man coming from Santa Fe, a trader who needs a guide through the canyon to the Hopi villages. I will be gone for 3 days, maybe 4. Catherine's stomach clenched with unexpected anxiety. 3 days seemed like an eternity. "Will you take Nijoni?" "No, too dangerous. The route goes through territory where there have been disputes over water rights. White ranchers and Navajo shepherds. It could turn violent, then who will stay with her?" Catherine asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it said. Thomas looked at her directly. "You will, if you are willing." Catherine felt the weight of what he was asking, the trust implicit in leaving his daughter in her care. "I am willing," she said without hesitation. "I will keep her safe." Thomas nodded slowly, as if he had expected no other answer but needed to hear it nonetheless. "There is a rifle above the door. You know how to use one?" Yes, my father taught me." "Good. If anyone comes who you do not know, anyone who makes you uncomfortable, You take Nijoni, and you go to the root cellar behind the house. There is a hidden door. You stay there until I return." Catherine nodded, her mouth dry. The fact that he was giving her these instructions made the danger feel suddenly very real. "No one should come," Thomas continued. "But if they do, if the men from the trading post come or anyone else, you protect her first. Yourself second. Understand?" "I understand," Catherine said, and she meant it with every fibre of her being. Thomas held her gaze for a long moment as if searching for any sign of doubt or weakness. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because he finally nodded and looked away. "Then it is settled. I leave at dawn." That night, Catherine lay in the narrow bed that had belonged to Thomas's mother, staring at the dark ceiling and thinking about the trust that had been placed in her. She thought about Nijoni, so small and full of light, and about Thomas, so guarded and wounded, but still capable of kindness. She thought about how strange it was that she had found sanctuary in the last place she would have expected, among people who had every reason to turn her away, but had chosen instead to let her stay. And as she drifted towards sleep, she made a silent promise to the ghost of the woman whose room she now occupied, to the memory of someone who had believed in helping the wounded and the lost. She would prove worthy of this trust. She would protect what had been entrusted to her, and she would do everything in her power to ensure that the fragile peace of this house remained unbroken. The second day without Thomas brought unexpected visitors. Catherine had risen early, as had become her habit, and set about the morning chores with Nijoni chattering beside her like a bright bird. They had fed the horses, gathered eggs from the small coop behind the house, and were preparing breakfast when the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the canyon. Not the steady, measured rhythm of a single rider, but the chaotic thunder of several horses moving fast. Catherine's hands stilled over the pot of beans she had been stirring. Through the window, she could see dust rising from the trail, could make out 3 riders approaching at a pace that suggested urgency or anger, possibly both. Her heart began to pound, and she immediately thought of Thomas's warning. The rifle above the door, the root cellar with its hidden entrance. "Nijoni," she said quietly, keeping her voice calm despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Go to your room and stay there until I tell you to come out." The little girl, sensitive to the shift in Catherine's tone, nodded solemnly and disappeared down the hallway without argument. Catherine wiped her hands on her apron, moved to the door, and lifted the rifle from its pegs. It was heavier than she remembered, solid and cold in her grip. She checked that it was loaded, her father's lessons coming back to her in a rush of muscle memory, then positioned herself near the window where she could see out but remain partially hidden. The riders slowed as they approached the house, and Catherine's stomach dropped when she recognized them. Buchanan from the trading post, his thick frame unmistakable even from a distance. Beside him rode 2 other men, one she did not know, tall and lean with a cruel mouth, and the other she recognized as Dawson, a ranch hand who had been in the trading post that first day, who had laughed when Mrs. Pritchard had suggested Catherine was running from the law. They reined in their horses just outside the corral, and Buchanan dismounted with a grunt, his boots hitting the ground hard. The other 2 followed, and all 3 stood for a moment, surveying the property with proprietary gazes that made Catherine's skin crawl. Buchanan raised his voice, loud and deliberately confrontational. "Blackwater, come out. We need words with you." Catherine remained still, barely breathing, hoping they would assume no one was home. But then Dawson pointed toward the house, toward the window where smoke still curled from the chimney, where the door stood slightly ajar to let in the morning air. "Someone's here," he said. "House is warm, fire's going." Buchanan's eyes narrowed, and he started toward the door. Catherine stepped back, raised the rifle to her shoulder, and spoke through the partially open door, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mr. Blackwater is not here. You should leave." Buchanan stopped, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced by something uglier. "Well now," he said slowly, If it isn't the mail-order bride-playing house. Where's your protector, girl? Off guiding some fool through the canyons while leaving you to mind his half-breed brat? Catherine's finger tightened on the trigger, but she forced herself to remain calm. He will be back soon. You should state your business and go. The tall stranger laughed, a sound like gravel scraping metal. She's got spirit, Buchanan. I like that in a woman. Shut up, Porter, Buchanan snapped, then turned his attention back to the house. We came because there's been trouble. Sheep gone missing from Dawson's boss's ranch. Tracks leading this way or close enough. We want to check Blackwater's corral, make sure he's not hiding stolen animals. Catherine knew this was a lie, could hear the false righteousness in Buchanan's voice. Thomas kept horses, not sheep, and besides, he would never steal. This was about something else, about power and intimidation, about reminding an Indian man that white settlers could come onto his property whenever they pleased. There are no sheep here, Catherine said firmly. Only horses, which you can see from where you stand. Now leave. Buchanan took another step forward. I don't take orders from some scared woman playing at being respectable. We're coming in to look around, and you can either step aside or get moved aside. The rifle barrel appeared through the doorway, pointed directly at Buchanan's chest. Catherine's hands did not shake. No, she said, her voice like iron. You will not. The three men froze. Buchanan's face flushed red, anger and humiliation warring in his expression. You threatening me, girl? You know what happens to people who point guns at honest citizens. I know what happens to honest citizens who trespass on private property, Catherine countered. I also know that Mr. Blackwater has friends in the Navajo community, and if you harm me or the child in this house, they will hear about it. Are you prepared for that consequence? It was a bluff, though not entirely. She had seen the respect the Navajo women showed Thomas, had heard the way they spoke of his mother. But she did not know if that respect would translate into protection for her, a white woman who had barely been here 2 weeks. Porter spat into the dust. She's bluffing, Buchanan. Let me go in there and drag her out. But Buchanan held up a hand, his eyes calculating. He was a bully, but he was not stupid. He knew that crossing Thomas Blackwater could have repercussions, knew that the fragile peace between the settlement and the Navajo community depended on a careful balance of power. Killing or harming a woman and child under Blackwater's protection, even a white woman, could tip that balance in dangerous directions. Fine, he said finally, his voice thick with barely suppressed rage. But you tell your Indian when he gets back that we're watching him. Tell him that if there's any more trouble with livestock, any at all, we'll be back. And next time, we won't be asking permission. He turned and mounted his horse with a violent swing of his leg, and the other two followed. They rode off at the same punishing pace they had arrived, and Catherine watched until they disappeared around the bend of the canyon before she allowed herself to lower the rifle. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding her system in the aftermath of confrontation, and she had to lean against the doorframe to keep her legs from buckling. Kate! Nijoni's small voice came from behind her, tentative and frightened. Are they gone? Catherine turned and knelt down, setting the rifle aside and opening her arms. Nijoni ran into them, and Catherine held her tight, feeling the little girl's heart hammering against her own. They are gone, she whispered into Nijoni's dark hair. You are safe, I promise. But even as she said the words, Catherine knew the danger was far from over. Buchanan was a man who did not forgive being challenged, especially not by a woman, especially not in front of other men. He would be back, she was certain of it. And next time he might bring more men, might come when he knew for certain that Thomas was away. That evening, after Nijoni had finally settled into an uneasy sleep, Catherine sat by the fire with the rifle across her lap and tried to think. She should tell Thomas what had happened when he returned, should warn him that tensions with the settlement were escalating. But she also knew that Thomas already carried so many burdens, that he walked a constant tightrope between two worlds that often wanted to destroy each other. Adding to that weight felt cruel, yet keeping silent felt like betrayal. He had trusted her with his daughter, with his home, and honesty was part of that trust. She must have dozed because she woke with a start to the sound of a horse approaching. Panic flared, and she raised the rifle before her mind had fully cleared. But then she heard a familiar voice calling softly from outside. "Catherine, it is Thomas. Do not shoot." Relief flooded through her so powerfully that she felt dizzy with it. She set the rifle down and hurried to open the door. And there he was, dismounting from Sage in the moonlight, his face shadowed, but his posture radiating exhaustion. He had returned a full day early. "Is everything all right?" he asked immediately, his eyes scanning her face, the house beyond her, looking for signs of trouble. Catherine wanted to lie, to tell him everything was fine, but she found she could not. "Buchanan came," she said quietly, "with 2 other men. They said they were looking for stolen sheep, but I think they just wanted to intimidate you. I sent them away." Thomas went very still. "How did you send them away?" "With your rifle and a firm voice," Catherine said, attempting lightness but hearing the tremor beneath her words. Thomas stared at her for a long moment, and she could not read his expression. Then, to her complete surprise, his mouth curved in what was unmistakably a smile, small and brief but genuine. "You stood off 3 men with a rifle. I did not know what else to do. They would not leave, and Nijoni was inside. And I remembered what you said about protecting her first." The smile faded, replaced by something more complex. Respect and concern and something else Catherine could not name. "You could have been hurt," he said quietly. "Buchanan is dangerous when his pride is wounded." "So am I," Catherine said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Thomas studied her in the moonlight, and Catherine felt exposed under that gaze, as if he could see all the way through her skin to the fear and determination and strange, fierce protectiveness that had risen in her when those men threatened his home. Finally, he nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, and moved past her into the house. "I will check on Nijoni," he said over his shoulder. "Then we will talk." Catherine waited, her heart still racing from his sudden appearance, from the relief of not being alone anymore, from the weight of what had happened and what it might mean. When Thomas emerged from Nijoni's room, he went directly to the fire and built it up, then poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot Catherine had kept warm. He handed her one and sat in his usual chair, and Catherine took the seat across from him, the same position they had occupied that night before he left. "Tell me everything," he said, and so she did. She recounted the arrival of the 3 men, the accusations about stolen sheep, Buchanan's barely veiled threats, her own response, the way Porter had wanted to force his way inside, the way Buchanan had finally backed down. Thomas listened without interrupting, his face impassive, but Catherine saw the tightening of his jaw, the way his hand gripped the coffee cup with barely controlled tension. When she finished, silence filled the space between them. Thomas stared into the fire, and Catherine waited, uncertain what response to expect. Finally he spoke, his voice low and controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of something dangerous. "Buchanan has wanted an excuse to cause me trouble for years," he said. "He does not like that I own land, that I have a home here on the edge of the reservation, that I move between the white world and the Navajo world. He sees it as a challenge to the natural order of things." "What will you do?" Catherine asked. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Nothing, for now. If I confront him, it escalates. If I report him to the territorial marshal, it becomes a legal matter, white man against Indian, and those cases rarely favor me, regardless of the truth. The best thing is to wait, to be vigilant, to make sure he has no real cause to return." Catherine frowned. "That does not seem like enough. He threatened your home, your daughter." "And you stopped him," Thomas said, turning to look at her directly. "You protected what was yours to protect, and you did it well. That matters." The words hung in the air between them, and Catherine felt something shift in her chest. What was yours to protect, as if she belonged here, as if this place and these people were hers to care for? The implication made her throat tight with emotion she did not fully understand. "I was afraid," she admitted quietly. "When I saw them coming, I thought about running, about taking Nijoni and hiding, like you said. But then I thought about you trusting me with her, with everything here, and I could not let them just walk in and destroy that trust." Thomas set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. "Fear is not weakness, Catherine. It is information. It tells you what matters, what you are willing to fight for. You were afraid, and you fought anyway. That is courage." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, though she could not have said exactly why. Perhaps because no one had ever called her courageous before. Perhaps because in that moment she believed it might be true. "I will not leave you alone again," Thomas said firmly. "Not until this is resolved. The trading job can wait. My daughters. Safety cannot. You will lose income," Catherine protested. "I will make it back. Money can be replaced. People cannot." They sat in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that forms between people who have weathered something difficult together and emerged changed by it. Catherine sipped her coffee and felt the warmth spread through her, felt the tension in her shoulders slowly release. Outside, the canyon was dark and still, and inside the fire crackled softly, and for this moment everything was safe. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Catherine was helping Nijoni braid her hair when they heard voices outside, multiple voices speaking in Navajo. Thomas went to the door, and Catherine heard him greet someone with what sounded like genuine warmth. When he returned, he was followed by 3 Navajo men, all older, all carrying themselves with an authority that suggested they were elders, or leaders of some kind. One of them, a man with silver hair worn long and a face carved by wind and sun into deep lines, spoke in English for Catherine's benefit. "We heard there was trouble here yesterday. White men from the trading post coming with accusations." Thomas nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "They left without incident." The elder's eyes shifted to Catherine, assessing. "We heard. The white woman who stays here sent them away with a rifle and strong words. We wanted to see if this story was true." Catherine stood, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. "It is true," she said simply. "They claim to be looking for stolen sheep, but I believe they wanted to intimidate and threaten. I told them to leave, and they did." Another of the elders, younger but with the same air of authority, spoke directly to Thomas in Navajo. Catherine could not understand the words, but she recognized the tone, questioning, perhaps challenging. Thomas responded in the same language, his voice firm, and a conversation ensued that lasted several minutes. Catherine stood quietly, feeling like an exhibit in a museum, on display but not included. Finally, the silver-haired elder turned back to her and spoke in English once more. "Thomas Blackwater tells us you can be trusted. He says you protected his daughter and his home as if they were your own. This is a serious claim." "It is the truth," Catherine said, meeting his gaze steadily. The elder nodded slowly. "Then you should know that we have been watching since you arrived. We wondered if you were a danger, if you would bring trouble to Thomas's door. Some among us thought he was foolish to take in a white woman with no family and no clear past." Catherine's heart sank, but she forced herself to remain still, to listen. "But we see now that you have strength," the elder continued. "You have loyalty. These are qualities we value, regardless of the color of one's skin. So we tell you this: if Buchanan returns, if any from the settlement come with violence in their hearts, you send word to the village. We will come. Thomas, Blackwater is one of ours, and now perhaps so are you." Catherine felt emotion swell in her throat, threatening to overwhelm her. She had not expected this, had not dared to hope for acceptance beyond the bare tolerance required for survival. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. The elder smiled, a brief warming of his severe features. "Do not thank us yet. Being one, Of ours means you share our burdens as well as our protections. It means you stand with us when trouble comes, not just for yourself. I understand, Catherine said, and she did. She was being offered something precious, a place, a purpose, a belonging that went beyond mere shelter. But it came with responsibilities, with expectations, with the requirement that she be more than just a woman seeking safety. She would need to be a member of a community, with all the complexity and challenge that entailed. After the elders left, Thomas stood in the doorway, watching them ride back toward the village. Catherine came to stand beside him, and for a moment they simply existed in shared space, two people bound by circumstance and growing trust. What they offered, Catherine said quietly, it is more than I ever expected. They do not offer lightly, Thomas replied. My mother earned their respect over many years. They honor her memory by extending that respect to those under my protection. But they also see something in you, something that reminds them that courage and loyalty are not the sole domain of any one people. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Catherine looked up at him, at his profile silhouetted against the morning light, and felt something shift inside her chest. What had begun as gratitude was transforming into something deeper, more complicated. She admired this man, his strength and his restraint, his fierce protection of his daughter, and his careful navigation of worlds that often seemed determined to collide. She admired the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence, the way he spoke only when words mattered, the way he had given her a chance when no one else would. And beneath the admiration, something else was growing. Something warmer and more dangerous, something that made her aware of his proximity in a way that had nothing to do with safety or shelter, and everything to do with the way her heart beat faster when he looked at her, the way her skin seemed to wake up when he was near. She pushed the feeling down, buried it beneath layers of practicality and self-protection. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. He had taken her in out of duty and decency, not desire. To read anything more into his actions would be foolish, would risk destroying the fragile peace they had built. But as they stood there, in the doorway, and Thomas's hand, briefly, almost accidentally, brushed against hers, Catherine felt the spark of connection. Undeniable and terrifying. And from the way Thomas pulled his hand back quickly, almost as if burned, she suspected he felt it too. The fever came in the night, silent and swift as a predator. Catherine woke to the sound of whimpering, a soft distress sound that pulled her from sleep with immediate alarm. She was out of bed before fully conscious, her bare feet hitting the cold floor as she rushed down the hallway toward Nijoni's room. The little girl lay curled on her side, her body trembling beneath the woven blankets, her face flushed an unnatural crimson in the dim light from the dying embers of the main room fire. Catherine pressed her hand to Nijoni's forehead and felt heat radiating from her skin, like she was touching a stone left too long in the desert sun. The child's eyes fluttered open, glazed and unfocused, and she murmured something in Navajo that Catherine could not understand. Panic clawed at Catherine's throat, but she forced it down, forced herself to think clearly. She ran to Thomas's room and knocked hard on the doorframe. "Thomas, wake up! Nijoni is burning with fever." She heard the immediate rustle of movement, and within seconds Thomas appeared, already pulling on his shirt, his face alert despite the hour. He moved past her without a word and knelt beside his daughter's bed, his large hand gentle as he touched her face, her neck, checking for signs Catherine did not know how to read. "How long?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled fear. "I do not know. I just heard her now." Thomas lifted Nijoni into his arms, and the child whimpered again, her small body going limp against his chest. He carried her to the main room and laid her carefully on the sofa near the hearth, then immediately began building up the fire. "Boil water," he said to Catherine, "as much as you can, and bring me the leather pouch hanging by the kitchen window." Catherine moved quickly, her hands steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. She filled every pot and kettle they had and set them over the growing flames, then retrieved the pouch Thomas had indicated. It was old, soft leather worn smooth by years of handling, and when she brought it to him, he opened it to reveal an assortment of dried herbs, roots, and what looked like pieces of bark. "My mother's medicine bag," he said quietly, his fingers sorting through the contents with practiced efficiency. "She taught me some, though I am no healer. But I know what to do for fever, for common sickness. This is yarrow for bringing down heat, willow bark for pain, sage for purification." He worked quickly, crushing herbs between his palms, adding them to a clay bowl. When the water boiled, Catherine poured some over the mixture, and a sharp, earthy scent filled the room. Thomas let it steep, then carefully lifted Nijoni's head and coaxed small sips of the tea between her cracked lips. The child swallowed reflexively, but did not wake. "We need to cool her down," Thomas said, and there was an edge of desperation in his voice that Catherine had never heard before. This was not the controlled, measured man she had come to know. This was a father watching his child suffer, powerless despite all his knowledge and strength. Catherine grabbed clean cloths and soaked them in cool water, then began gently wiping Nijoni's face, her neck, her small arms. The child's skin was so hot that the water seemed to steam against it. Thomas watched, his jaw clenched so tight Catherine could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. "Tell me what else to do," Catherine said firmly. "I am here. It was me." Thomas looked at her, and in his eyes she saw raw fear barely contained. "Just keep her cool. Keep giving her water when she will take it. I need to ride to the village, get the medicine woman. She will know more than I do." "No," Catherine said sharply. Thomas's head snapped up, surprise flickering across his features. "You cannot leave her right now. Look at her, Thomas. She needs her father here. I will go." "You do not know the way in the dark. Then draw me a map. Tell me landmarks." "I can find it." Thomas hesitated, conflict playing across his face. Catherine stepped closer, her voice urgent. "You said I could be trusted with your daughter. Trust me now. I will bring help, and you will stay with her. That is what she needs." The internal battle lasted only seconds, but Catherine could see the moment he made his decision. He moved to the table, grabbed a piece of charcoal from the fire, and began sketching on a scrap of paper. "Follow the main trail north until you reach the split oak. Take the left fork, not the right. The left will lead you through a narrow passage between two red cliffs. On the other side, you will see the village fires. Find a woman named Desba. Tell her Thomas Blackwater's daughter is sick with fever. She will come." Catherine nodded, already moving toward the door to grab her boots and the heavy coat Thomas had given her weeks ago. "I will not fail you," she said. "Catherine," Thomas called as she reached the door. She turned. His face was pale in the firelight, his eyes dark pools of fear and something else, something that looked almost like trust, so deep it was painful. "Be careful. There are wolves in the canyon at night, and men who are worse than wolves." "I know," she said simply. "But Nijoni needs help more than I need safety." She was out the door before he could protest further, running toward the corral where the horses dozed in the cold night air. She chose Sage, the paint mare who knew her best, and saddled her with fumbling fingers made clumsy by urgency and fear. The moon hung high and bright, a silver coin in the vast darkness, providing just enough light to see the trail ahead. The ride was terrifying. Every shadow seemed to hold danger. Every sound made her heart leap into her throat. But she kept moving, kept following the path Thomas had described, and when she reached the split oak, gnarled and ancient against the starlit sky, she took the left fork without hesitation. The narrow passage between the cliffs was like riding through a crack in the earth itself, the walls rising so high on either side that they blocked out the sky. Catherine's breath came in short gasps, her hands tight on the reins, and she whispered prayers to a God she was not sure listened but needed to believe in anyway. "Please let me find help. Please let Nijoni live." Then she was through, bursting out of the passage into a wider valley, and there, spread before her like scattered embers, were the fires of the Navajo village. She rode straight for the center, not caring about protocol or propriety, and as she approached, dogs began barking and figures emerged from hogans. Alarmed by the commotion, "Desba," Catherine called out, her voice hoarse and desperate. "I need Desba. Thomas Blackwater's daughter is sick. Please, I need help." An older woman stepped forward, wrapped in a blanket, her grey hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes were sharp and assessing even in the dim firelight. "I'm Desba. What sickness?" Fever, very high. She's burning up and nothing we do brings it down. Thomas said you would know what to do." Desba's expression shifted from suspicion to concern. She turned and spoke rapidly in Navajo to the people gathered around, and within moments there was purposeful movement. Desba disappeared into her hogan and emerged carrying a large woven bag. Another woman brought a horse already saddled, and Desba mounted with the ease of someone half her age. "Lead the way," she commanded, and Catherine turned Sage back toward the passage, praying she could retrace the path as quickly as she had come. The ride back felt longer, though Catherine knew it was probably faster. Desba rode beside her, asking questions in careful English about when the fever started, what symptoms had appeared, what remedies had already been tried. Catherine answered as best she could, though she felt painfully inadequate, aware of how little she truly understood about healing or sickness. When they finally reached the homestead, dawn was just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of pale grey. Thomas was exactly where Catherine had left him, kneeling beside Nijoni, a damp cloth in his hand. He'd looked up as they entered, and the relief that flooded his face when he saw Desba was almost heartbreaking in its intensity. Desba moved immediately to the child, her hands quick and sure as she examined her. She spoke in Navajo, rapid questions that Thomas answered in the same language. Then she opened her bag and began pulling out items. Dried plants Catherine did not recognize, small pouches of powder, a bundle wrapped in red cloth. "Boil more water," Desba commanded without looking up. "And bring me honey if you have it, and salt." Catherine moved to obey, grateful to have tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind focused on something other than the small, still form on the sofa. Behind her she could hear Desba and Thomas speaking in low voices, the medicine woman's tone authoritative but not unkind. For hours they worked. Desba created poultices and placed them on Nijoni's chest and forehead. She brewed teas from combinations of herbs that filled the house with pungent, unfamiliar scents. She sang in a low voice, words Catherine could not understand, but that seemed to carry weight and power nonetheless. Thomas assisted, following her instructions without question, and Catherine did whatever was asked of her, fetching water, holding Nijoni still when she thrashed, wiping away the sweat that poured from the child's small body. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Catherine felt exhaustion dragging at her like chains. She had not slept, had ridden through dangerous territory in the dead of night, had spent hours in a state of constant anxiety. But she could not rest, not while Nijoni still burned, not while Thomas's face remained tight with fear. Finally, as midday approached, Desba sat back on her heels and nodded slowly. "The fever is breaking," she said. "See the sweat changes. Before it was dry, hot. Now it flows freely. This is good. The body is releasing the sickness." Thomas leaned forward, his hand gentle on his daughter's forehead, and Catherine saw his shoulders sag with relief so profound it seemed to take the last of his strength. "She will be all right?" he asked, his voice rough. "She will recover," Desba confirmed. "But it will take time. Keep her warm, keep giving her the tea I prepared, and let her sleep as much as she needs. No solid food until she asks for it. Just broth and water." Thomas nodded, and when he looked up at Desba there was gratitude written in every line of his face. "Thank you. I owe you a debt." Desba waved a dismissive hand. "You owe me nothing. Your mother delivered my youngest son when the birth went wrong. She saved both our lives. This is just returning what was given." Then the medicine woman turned her sharp gaze on Catherine, and there was something in her expression that made Catherine straighten despite her exhaustion. "You," Desba said, "you rode alone through the canyon at night to bring help for a child not your own. You risked wolves and raiders and getting lost in the darkness. Why? Catherine met the older woman's eyes steadily. Because she needed help, and I could provide it. Many people can do a thing, Desba said quietly. Few actually do it when the cost is high. You have proven yourself, white woman, not just to Thomas Blackwater, but to me, and through me to our people. This will be remembered. She gathered her things and prepared to leave, refusing Thomas's offers of payment or food. I will return tomorrow to check on the child, she said. But I think she will be fine. She is strong, like her grandmother before her. After Desba left, the house fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft sound of Njoni's breathing, slower and steadier now. The breathing of healing sleep, rather than feverish unconsciousness. Thomas remained beside her, his hand resting lightly on her small one, as if he needed the physical connection to believe she was truly safe. Catherine moved to the kitchen, preparing broth as Desba had instructed, cleaning up the remnants of the night's crisis. Her body moved on pure will now, exhaustion making everything feel distant and dreamlike. She was pouring the broth into a bowl when she felt Thomas's presence behind her. You should rest, he said quietly. You have been awake all night. So have you, Catherine replied without turning around. But I did not ride through the canyon alone in the dark. Catherine set down the bowl and finally turned to face him. He looked haggard, lines of strain carved deep around his eyes and mouth, but there was something else there too, something that made her breath catch. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something precious and unexpected, as if he could not quite believe she was real. I told you I would not fail you, she said softly. You could have died, Thomas said, and his voice was rough with emotion barely contained. There are men who would have taken you, animals that would have attacked, places where one wrong turn means falling into darkness. You risked everything. So would you have done if positions were reversed? That is different to see why, Catherine challenged. Because you are a man and I am a woman. Because this is your daughter and not mine. Because you think you owe me less than I owe you. Thomas was silent, and Catherine saw him struggling with something, some internal battle between what he believed and what he felt. Finally, he stepped closer, and when he spoke, his voice was low and intense. It is different, because I cannot bear the thought of losing you. The words hung in the air between them, stark and honest and terrifying. Catherine's heart began to pound, but not from fear. From something else entirely, something that had been growing in her chest for weeks, but that she had not dared to name. Thomas, she whispered, but she did not know what else to say, did not know how to navigate this sudden shift from gratitude and respect into something far more dangerous. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, his hand cupped her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from such a strong man. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, and Catherine felt her eyes flutter closed at the simple, devastating tenderness of the gesture. When I thought you might not return, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. When I sat beside my daughter and imagined you lost in the darkness, I realized something. You are not just a woman I helped because it was the right thing to do. You are not just someone passing through who happened to stay. You have become essential, Catherine, to this house, to my daughter, to me. Catherine opened her eyes and found him watching her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and seen in a way she had never experienced before. I do not know how to be essential, she admitted. I've spent so long just trying to survive, trying not to be a burden. I do not know how to be more than that. You already are, Thomas said. You just have not realized it yet. He leaned forward, and Catherine knew he was going to kiss her, knew she should step back, should maintain the careful distance they had preserved until now. But she did not want to step back. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the connection and comfort and terrifying possibility of belonging not just to a place, but to a person. Their lips met softly, a question more than a demand, and Catherine felt something inside her chest crack open, felt walls she had built to protect herself begin to crumble. The kiss was gentle and searching, and when they finally pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I swore I would not do this," he whispered. "I swore I would not let anyone close enough to hurt me again. But you have undone all my careful defenses, Catherine Harlow. You have made me hope when I thought hope was dead." Catherine's hands had somehow found their way to his chest, could feel the rapid beating of his heart beneath her palms. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I am afraid that this is a dream, and I will wake up alone in the desert again. I am afraid that I will disappoint you, that I'm not strong enough or good enough or worthy enough." Thomas pulled back just far enough to look into her eyes. "You rode alone through the night to save my daughter. You faced down armed men to protect my home. You have proven your worth 100 times over. The only question is whether you believe it yourself." From the sofa, Nijoni stirred, making a small sound, and both Thomas and Catherine immediately turned their attention to her. The little girl's eyes fluttered open, clear now, the glaze of fever finally broken. She looked at her father, then at Catherine, and a small smile curved her lips. "Kate came back," she whispered, her voice hoarse but recognizably her own. Catherine moved to kneel beside the sofa, taking the child's small hand in hers. "Of course I came back. I promised I would keep you safe, did I not?" "You did," Nijoni agreed. Then, with the devastating honesty of children, she added, "I knew you would. You love us. People who love us do not leave." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes, and she did not try to hide them. "You are right," she said softly. "I do love you. Both of you. I think I have loved you since the moment you took my hand in the trading post and told me your father would keep me safe." Thomas knelt beside Catherine, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder, and the three of them stayed like that for a long moment, bound together by crisis survived and love acknowledged, and the fragile, precious beginning of something that might, with care and courage, grow into a family. Later, after Nijoni had taken broth and fallen back into healing sleep, after Catherine had finally allowed herself to rest for a few hours, she woke to find Thomas sitting by the window, staring out at the canyon. The afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and the light caught in his dark hair, making it shine like polished stone. She rose and went to stand beside him, and he reached for her hand without looking, as if he had known she was there. Their fingers intertwined, and Catherine felt the rightness of it, the simple, profound connection of two people who had found each other against all odds. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Thomas was silent for a moment, then turned to look at her. "Now we live," he said simply. "We heal, we build, we defend what we have built, and we stop being afraid of hoping for more." Catherine nodded. And together they stood watching the light fade from the canyon. Two souls who had been broken finding themselves unexpectedly, impossibly whole. Spring came to the canyon like a whispered promise, slow and uncertain at first, then blooming with sudden intensity. 3 months had passed since Nijoni's fever broke. 3 months since Thomas had kissed Catherine in the half-light of exhaustion and fear, and acknowledged what had been growing between them for weeks. The world outside the homestead had not stopped turning, had not paused to accommodate the quiet revolution happening within those adobe walls. But inside, everything had changed. Catherine woke each morning now not to fear or uncertainty, but to the sound of Nijoni's laughter as she chased the chickens in the yard, to the smell of coffee Thomas made strong and bitter the way he preferred, to the warmth of knowing she had a place and a purpose. She had stopped thinking of herself as a temporary guest, had stopped waiting for the moment when she would be asked to leave. This was home now, fragile and imperfect and more precious than anything she had ever known. But the outside world had not forgotten them, and on a bright morning in early April, it came calling. Catherine was in the garden, teaching Nijoni how to plant corn seeds in the traditional way Desba had shown them. When she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching fast, her hands stilled in the dirt, and she looked up to see dust rising from the trail, too much dust for a single rider. Thomas was in the corral working with a new horse, and she saw him straighten, his body going tense with alertness. "Nijoni," Catherine said quietly, keeping her voice calm. Go inside and stay there until I come for you." The little girl, who had learned in recent months to read danger in adult voices, nodded and ran toward the house without argument. Catherine stood and wiped her hands on her apron, then moved to stand beside Thomas as 7 riders came into view. Her stomach dropped when she recognized them. Buchanan at the front, his face red and triumphant, and beside him the territorial marshal, a lean man with a star pinned to his vest and eyes that revealed nothing. Behind them rode 4 other men, all armed, all wearing expressions that made Catherine's skin crawl. This was not a social visit. This was a reckoning. Buchanan dismounted with obvious satisfaction, and the marshal followed more slowly, his gaze sweeping the homestead with professional assessment. Thomas stood perfectly still, his face a mask of careful neutrality, but Catherine could see the tension in his shoulders, could feel the danger crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. "Thomas Blackwater," the marshal said, his voice flat and official. "I am Marshal Hendricks. I have received a complaint regarding stolen property and threats made against citizens of the territorial settlement." "What property?" Thomas asked, his voice level. Buchanan stepped forward, barely containing his glee. 3 horses gone missing from my stable 2 weeks back. Good animals, worth money. And just yesterday we found them in a canyon not 5 miles from here, hidden in a box valley that only someone who knows this land could find. "I did not take your horses," Thomas said flatly. "That is what thieves always say," Buchanan sneered. "But we have witnesses who saw you near my property the night before they disappeared. We have tracks leading from my stable toward your land, and we found the horses in a place you have been known to use for grazing." Catherine felt cold wash through her. This was a setup carefully planned and executed. Buchanan had finally found his excuse, and he had made sure to bring the law with him so that whatever happened next would carry the weight of legal authority. Duh. Marshal Hendricks held up a hand, silencing Buchanan. "Mr. Blackwater, these are serious accusations. I will need to search your property and ask you some questions. If you cooperate, this will go easier for everyone." "I have nothing to hide," Thomas said. "Search what you want. You will find no stolen horses here." The marshal nodded to his men, who began moving through the property, looking in the barn, the corral behind outbuildings. Catherine watched them, her heart pounding, knowing they would find nothing because there was nothing to find, but also knowing that in situations like this, truth was often less important than power. Buchanan stepped closer to Thomas, his voice low enough that only those nearby could hear. "I told you I would make you pay for embarrassing me, for letting your woman point a rifle at honest men. This is just the beginning, Blackwater. Even if you get out of this, there will be more. We will hound you until you pack up and leave, or until we bury you in the ground where you belong." Catherine saw Thomas's jaw tighten, saw his hands clench into fists, but he did not respond. He knew, as she did, that any show of anger or resistance would only give Buchanan more ammunition. One of the deputies returned from the barn, shaking his head at the marshal. "Nothing here, sir. Just the horses we saw earlier, and they all match the descriptions Mr. Blackwater provided as his own stock." Buchanan's face darkened. "Check the canyons. Check the hidden valleys. I'm telling you, he hid them somewhere nearby. He knows this land better than any white man." The marshal turned to Buchanan with barely concealed annoyance. "Mr. Buchanan, if the stolen horses were found 5 miles from here in a public canyon, that does not constitute evidence that Mr. Blackwater took them. Anyone familiar with this territory could have hidden them there." "But the tracks," Buchanan protested. "Tracks can be made by anyone," the marshal interrupted. "And witnesses who claim to have seen someone near a property at night are notoriously unreliable. Unless you have actual evidence linking Mr. Blackwater to the theft, I cannot arrest him based on your suspicions alone." Catherine felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the look of rage on Buchanan's face. He was a man unaccustomed to being thwarted, especially by the law he had assumed would side with him automatically. Then Buchanan's gaze shifted to Catherine, and his expression transformed into something uglier. "What about her?" An unmarried woman living under his roof, sharing his home, corrupting his half-breed child with her presence. That is indecency, Marshal. That is a moral violation that should concern any God-fearing lawman. The air seemed to freeze. Catherine felt every eye turn to her, felt the weight of judgment and accusation pressing down like a physical force. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Thomas stepped forward. Placing himself between her and Buchanan, "You will not speak of her that way," Thomas said, and his voice carried a dangerous edge that made even Buchanan step back. "I will speak however I want," Buchanan blustered, but there was fear in his eyes now. "She is a woman of questionable character, and everyone knows it. She showed up here claiming to be a mail-order bride who was abandoned. But who is to say she was not running from the law? Who is to say she is not a criminal herself, using you for protection? I will tell you who she is." A new voice rang out, clear and authoritative. Everyone turned to see a group of riders approaching from the direction of the Navajo village. At the front rode the silver-haired elder who had visited months before, and beside him rode Desba and several other members of the community. They reined in their horses at the edge of the property, and the elder dismounted with dignified grace. "I am called by water," the elder announced in English, his voice carrying across the yard. "I speak for my people in matters concerning this land and those who live upon it. You ask who this woman is, white man? I will tell you. She is Catherine Harlow, who rode alone through the night to save the life of a child not her own. She is the woman who faced down armed men to protect this household when she had every reason to flee. She is recognized by my people as one who has earned respect through courage and loyalty." Marshal Hendricks looked intrigued. "You can vouch for her character." "I can and do," Called by Water said firmly. "And I can also tell you that Thomas Blackwater is a man of honor who has never stolen so much as a blade of grass from anyone. If there are missing horses, look to those who make accusations rather than those who are accused. Often the loudest voices belong to the guiltiest hearts." Buchanan's face had gone purple with rage. "You cannot come here and interfere with territorial law. This is not your business, Indian. This land was ours long before it was yours," Called by Water replied calmly. "And what happens to Thomas Blackwater and those under his protection is very much our business. He is one of us, and we stand with him." The other Navajo riders had dismounted and now stood in a line behind their elder, a silent but unmistakable show of solidarity. Marshal Hendricks looked at them, then at Buchanan, then at Thomas and Catherine could see him doing calculations, weighing the political costs of different actions. "Mr. Buchanan," the marshal said finally, "unless you can provide concrete evidence of theft, I see no grounds for arrest here. The missing horses were found in a public area. There is no proof connecting Mr. Blackwater to their disappearance, and you have brought me out here on what appears to be a personal vendetta rather than a legitimate legal complaint." "But," Buchanan sputtered, "but nothing." The marshal cut him off sharply. "I suggest you focus your energy on securing your own property rather than harassing your neighbors. And as for the moral accusations regarding Miss Harlow, unless someone is filing a formal complaint, that is also outside my jurisdiction." He turned to Thomas. "Mr. Blackwater, I apologize for the inconvenience. You are free to continue about your business." Thomas nodded once, his face still carefully neutral, but Catherine saw the relief in his eyes. The marshal and his men mounted up and rode off, but Buchanan remained, his rage barely contained. He looked at Thomas, at Catherine, at the Navajo riders standing in silent support, and Catherine could see him calculating, weighing whether to push further or retreat. "This is not over," he said finally, his voice low and venomous. "You think you are safe because you have Indians to protect you, but they will not always be there. And when they are not, when you are alone and vulnerable, I will be waiting." He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving a wake of dust and malice behind him. Catherine felt her knees go weak with relief. Thomas turned to Called by Water, and the gratitude in his face was profound. "Thank you," he said simply. "You did not have to come." "Yes, we did," the elder replied. You are one of ours, and we protect our own. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "it gave me great pleasure to see that man's face turn the color of a ripe plum." Desba stepped forward and looked at Catherine with her sharp, assessing gaze. "You have been tested many times, white woman. Each time you have proven yourself. But I think perhaps it is time for you to stop being tested, to stop having to prove your worth every day. It is time for you to simply be—" Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "I do not know how to do that," she admitted. "I do not know how to stop waiting for everything to fall apart." "You learn," Desba said simply, "the same way you learned everything else. One day at a time. After the Navajo riders left, after the dust had settled and the danger had passed, Catherine found herself standing in the garden again, staring at the half-planted rows of corn. She felt exhausted, wrung out by fear and relief, and the constant strain of living on the edge of disaster. She heard footsteps behind her, and knew without looking that it was Thomas. "It will never truly be over, will it?" she asked quietly. "There will always be someone like Buchanan, someone who wants to hurt us because of what we are, because of what we represent." Thomas was silent for a moment, then moved to stand beside her. "Perhaps," he said. "But that does not mean we stop living. That does not mean we surrender what we have built." Catherine turned to look at him, at this man who had given her shelter when no one else would, who had trusted her with his daughter and his home and eventually his heart. "What have we built, Thomas? We exist in this strange in-between place, not quite married, not quite separate, not quite accepted by either of our worlds. What is this?" Thomas reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against her skin. "It is what we choose to make it," he said. "And I choose to make it permanent." Catherine's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Thomas knelt down in the dirt of the garden, still holding her hand, and looked up at her with eyes that held no doubt, no hesitation, only certainty. "I'm saying marry me, Catherine Harlow. Not because society demands it, not because it would make things easier with people like Buchanan, but because I want to stand before whatever powers govern this world and claim you as mine, as I hope you will claim me as yours." Catherine felt tears stream down her face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief and joy, and the overwhelming realization that she had found something she had never dared to hope for. A home, not just in a place, but in a person. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Thomas stood and pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who had been broken finding themselves made whole by the simple act of choosing each other. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, not in a church with a preacher, but in the canyon itself, surrounded by red rock walls that had stood for millennia and the people who had come to matter most. Called by Water performed the ceremony, speaking in both Navajo and English, binding them together with words older than the territory itself. Desba and the other women from the village brought food and gifts, woven blankets and pottery and herbs for blessing and protection. Nijoni stood between Catherine and Thomas, her small hands holding theirs, and when called by Water asked if anyone objected to the union. The little girl spoke up in her clear, bright voice. "I do not object. I think it is perfect. Now Kate is truly my mother, not just in my heart, but in the world." There was laughter and warmth, and when Thomas kissed Catherine as his wife, the canyon seemed to echo with approval, the wind carrying their joy across the vast landscape. Even some of the white settlers, who had come to respect Thomas's skill as a tracker and guide, attended, standing awkwardly at the edges but present nonetheless. A sign that perhaps slowly acceptance was possible. That night, as they sat together outside their home under a sky full of stars, Nijoni asleep inside and the fire burning low, Catherine leaned against her husband and felt something she had not felt since before the wagon train was attacked. She felt safe, truly safe, not just in body but in soul. "Do you ever think about how different things would have been if Nijoni had not spoken up that day in the trading post?" she asked quietly. Thomas was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "No, because I do not believe in different paths. I believe we were meant to find each other, that everything that happened, all the pain and fear and struggle, led us to this moment. My mother used to say that the canyon knows what it is doing when it shapes the rock. The water does not ask permission, it simply flows, and over time, it creates something beautiful." Catherine thought about that, about the idea that her suffering had not been meaningless, that it had been the water shaping her into someone strong enough to survive, to fight, to love. "Your mother was wise," she said. "She was," Thomas agreed. "And I think she would have liked you very much. I think she would have recognized in you the same strength she tried to teach me, the strength to keep going even when the path is unclear." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars wheel slowly across the sky. And Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had left Missouri with nothing but desperate hope and a false promise. She had been abandoned, rejected, hunted, and left for dead. She had stood at the edge of the world with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. And then a little girl with braided hair and solemn eyes had whispered 6 words that changed everything. "My father will keep you safe." Those words had been a promise, and they had been kept. But more than that, they had been an invitation into a life Catherine had never imagined possible. A life of purpose and belonging and love that transcended the boundaries others tried to impose. Months passed, and then years, and the homestead grew. They added rooms to the house, expanded the garden, took in more horses. Nijoni grew tall and confident, learning the old ways from the elders and the new ways from the books Catherine taught her to read. Other outcasts found their way to the homestead, people with nowhere else to go, and Catherine and Thomas gave them what they had once been given: shelter and purpose, and a chance to heal. Buchanan tried once more to cause trouble, bringing accusations about water rights violations, but the territorial governor, who had received letters from both the Navajo leadership and several influential ranchers praising Thomas's work as a peacekeeper between communities, dismissed the complaints. Eventually, Buchanan left the territory entirely, and the settlement found a new equilibrium, one that included rather than excluded those who were different. On Catherine's 30th birthday, 7 years after she had first stepped off that train into a world that wanted nothing to do with her, she stood in the same garden where Thomas had proposed and looked around at everything they had built. Nijoni was teaching a young Navajo boy how to braid rope, her patience and kindness a reflection of all she had been taught. Thomas was in the corral with a skittish mare, his voice low and soothing, gentling her with the same patience he had once used on Catherine herself. And Catherine realized that she was no longer afraid. She was no longer waiting for disaster to strike, no longer bracing herself for rejection or abandonment. She had found what she had been searching for without knowing she was searching. A place where she belonged, not because she had to prove herself, but simply because she existed. That evening, as they gathered around the table for dinner, Nijoni said a prayer of thanksgiving in Navajo, as she did every night. Then she added in English, "And thank you for bringing Kate to us, even though the path was hard. Thank you for making us a family." Thomas reached across the table and took Catherine's hand, and she squeezed back, feeling the rough calluses of his palm against hers, feeling the strength and steadiness that had held her up when she could not stand on her own. Outside, the canyon glowed in the light of the setting sun, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and crimson, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, its voice echoing across the vast, beautiful landscape. And in that moment, Catherine Blackwater knew with absolute certainty that she was home. Years later, when Nijoni had grown and married and brought her own children to visit, when Catherine's hair had begun to show silver threads, and Thomas's face had deepened with the lines of a life well lived, they would sit on the porch in the evening and tell stories. Stories of courage and kindness, of communities built across differences, of love found in unexpected places, and they would always begin the same way, with Catherine's voice soft but steady as she spoke to wide-eyed grandchildren who hung on every word. Once I was lost and alone, abandoned in a place where no one would help me. I thought my story had ended before it had truly begun, but then a little girl with braided hair whispered 6 words that changed my life forever. The children would lean forward, eager to hear what came next, and Catherine would smile, reaching for Thomas's hand as she always did, and continue. She said, "My father will keep you safe." And he did. And in keeping me safe, he gave me something far more precious than safety. He gave me a reason to be brave, and the canyon would listen, as it always had, holding their stories the way it held the memories of all who had walked its paths, loved within its walls, and found in its ancient, enduring presence a reminder that some things, love and courage, and the fierce determination to protect what matters most, were eternal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.